Welcome to At Home Is Now. I'm your host. My name is Monica Overhuber, and my guest today is Joe Brummer. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, I like to start with a question. What are you most excited about at present in your life, and how does it contribute to your joy and happiness?
Hmm. Probably I'm actually excited because, like you, I started a podcast a couple months ago and I've gotten into podcasting and I'm surprised how much fun I'm finding it to be. And so but it also is very related to my work, which of course is important to me. And so it's giving me lots of giggles and happiness for the moment. Both the learning and the shows. Like the shows, I love the stories we get to tell, but also like you're on StreamYard. I'm just learning how to use it. I'm learning how to use, different editing tools, and I don't know. It's just been like a geek out kind of fun thing for me right now. And so I don't have too many things to geek out on, but podcasting seems to be one of them now.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I actually am over 6 years now, so
Yeah, wow. I got about 6 months, if that. I'm not even sure it's that.
it has changed over time and evolved. So but yes, I think podcasting is a really exciting thing to do, and a way, and for me also a way to get to know people all over the world and get to know their ideas and stories. It's really exciting. Yeah. So why don't we go into that? What led to the podcasting? Because that's what you're really excited about now. But there's a reason why you got into it, obviously.
Yeah. It's I've been on a lot of podcasts as a guest and like the idea of it. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I've had friends tell me I should start a podcast for a long time. And I work as an educational consultant primarily. And because of our current administration's, way of doing things, a lot of schools are not hiring consultants. And so that's fine. I have other places to find work, except it means I have a lot of time on my hands. And I'm like, I was waking up each day kind of going, what am I going to do with myself? I was like, I need a hobby. I need a project right now. And so I started podcasting to sort of fill that space and literally give me something to do. I'm like, if I have this much time, I could be recording episodes during the day and then airing those once a week. I'll have a bank of episodes. Like it just makes sense. Like, and because of my field of work, I have lots of access to really cool people to invite on the show whose expertise is similar to mine. And so it's just, I've been having a blast just doing this podcast thing. And, not exactly sure that I forget what made me really like, hit the go button. But just over time, I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And so I signed up. Once you pay the bill for StreamYard, you're like, all right, well, now I'm committed because this is expensive. And so now I guess I'm just in at least for the next year because I paid it off for a year. So I guess I'm doing it for a year, and we'll reevaluate then.
Yeah, it's exciting. I certainly have found ways not to need to pay anywhere, but yes, it's an option, and then you get. And if you need that to stay committed, that's a good way to do it.
I always need some little motivator, to get me going. So money
Yeah.
works.
So another motivator probably is the topics that you wanted to share with people on the podcast.
Yeah, I've spent the last 20 years or more studying trauma, studying its impacts on children, its impacts on adults who were traumatized as children. And, that is one of the things I'm passionate about. I wrote 2 books on it that were both, sold really well in the education field. And so now I get to do a podcast that focuses not just on trauma informed schools, but also focuses on what does healing look like for people who've experienced traumatic events. And since I have a history of trauma that's pretty bizarre, I don't know, it just puts me in a unique position to be like, all right, I'm going to do this. And so I've been fairly lucky to have some really incredible guests come on the show and talk about what their healing look like. I think it's easy for people to talk about their trauma. It's harder to talk about what healing look like because the healing thing is where the work is. The healing thing is where the shame lives. The healing thing is where you get better. And that's the stuff I think people don't often talk about. We talk about what happened to us because it's, feel sorry for me or give me attention. But when you talk about the healing, that's a whole different ball game. Because then you got to talk about therapy. Then you got to talk about recovery. You get to talk about, the pain of letting go and grieving. Because I think a lot of trauma recovery is grieving the things that could have happened and didn't, or grieving the things that did happen to you that you wished hadn't. And so it's a lot of grief work, it's a lot of nervous system work, and I think that's a topic I don't hear people talk about as much. People love to talk about how they've been through really horrible things and now they're successful. Great, but what happened in between? Like, how'd you get there? And that's what I think is exciting me about this podcast is we get to talk about that space in between the trauma and the healing and the success. Like, what's the healing look like? And so I've been pretty excited about the guests that have come on and shared their stories, but also shared their story of healing and like what are the things that worked for them. Everything from journaling to therapies to a particular, spiritual awakening that might have happened. I've heard a bunch of different things over time. And so it's fairly exciting to like see everybody's process is so different, yet pretty inspiring.
Yeah, I find all my guests inspiring. They all have their unique ways of having come to where they are now, and what
Yeah.
has led to it, and what actually helps them, right? So it's a very, very, very important subject to look at, and I think that's really, really good. That gives the opportunity to speak about that because
Yeah.
things like forgiveness become a topic. How do you let go of all the crap without looking away from it, but looking at it and then finding another way to
Yeah.
live with knowing that that happened and what it meant at the time and what it means now. And so yeah, this is a really, really important subject. And yeah, I'd love to hear your story too, if you want to share
Yeah.
that and how you were able to get to a place where you're able to do these things, like having a podcast of your own and educating.
Yeah. So the story starts pretty, I grew up into a house filled with trauma and as young as 4 years old. And don't get me wrong, crap happened before 4 years old, but even at 4 years old, I was witness to a motorcycle gang trying to murder my mom in broad daylight on the street. This motorcycle gang's initiation process, and of course, this is back in the early 70s. The initiation process was to murder the first woman you see. And so my mom was the first person this person saw and attempted to kill her and failed, but put her in a hospital for a while. But her four children were in the car watching. And so all four of us witnessed this event. Now, I don't remember it. My older brothers and sisters do have more of a semantic memory, but just because you don't remember it doesn't mean your body doesn't remember it, and your body does. And so that would just bring on like the beginnings, and then it would go from there. That I unfortunately also had a mom whose idea of punishment was things like burning her hands. I mean, she could go from being really loving, fun mom to a violent monster within seconds and then flip back. And all of a sudden, you're supposed to be like playful kid again. And as a kid, like I never knew what mom I was getting. So that made my like sort of home life growing up, youngest of four, it made my home life sort of chaotic and violent and, hyper vigilant at best. And so, I always tell people that trauma, it causes you to see red flags where they aren't and to not see red flags where they are. And so I would often put myself in really, quite frankly, dangerous situations and not know that's what I was doing. Because, if you're used to chaos and violence, well, then it doesn't really phase you. And so I often would find myself in like really precarious situations and wonder, how did I get here? Like, what am I doing here? And unfortunately, one of those things led at 21 years old to be gay bashed for the first time. And so I was jumped, beaten, thrown in a river. Really colorful story. Um, and, came back from that not out of the closet. So even more torturous is I can't tell anybody what just happened for real. So I've got to make up a story now to explain why I'm all beat up, why my head's all swollen and Nike swish marks on my arms from being kicked. And so I made up a story. And then the police wanted to arrest me because I couldn't keep my story straight. And like, one, I just got banged in the head with a baseball bat. And two, I'm not keeping the story straight because I don't want you to have the truth because it would out me. And somehow I got away with that for at least another year before I came out. But it also put me into my 20s, um, basically starting off my 20s by having a nervous breakdown. And when I went into the hospital, um, I got in there and started talking about my childhood because, of course, you go into a therapeutic situation, whether you went through trauma or not, they're going to ask about your childhood. And when I started talking about it, the looks on people's faces were like shocking to me. Like people looked horrified. And of course, when you're a kid being traumatized, you don't know you're being traumatized. You don't know that your home is any different than anyone else's because why would you know? Like, you're not in other people's homes, you're in yours, and you just think everyone's is like yours. And so it wasn't until I was in my 20s where I was like, oh, wait, people don't have their food locked up. People don't have the weird, crazy rules, and people aren't getting beaten up by their parents. And I was like, oh, okay. So I did not grow up in this pretty picture, but I didn't know that till I was 22 and hospitalized. And so, like any curious, shocked person, I'm going to go right back to the source, right? And so I confronted my parents about all of this and the abuse and the craziness. And my parents' reply was, don't come home. And so the next step is now I'm home. I'm now having a nervous breakdown and I'm homeless. And so I couch surfed, lived in my, slept in my car a few nights. And then eventually, like, actually, a person I was staying in the hospital with said, look, my wife, we have an extra room, come stay with us. And he remained hospitalized for a while. But I went and stayed with his wife and became friends with her. And uh, that was a really supportive thing to come out to, was supported people. Um, and so still my 20s went pretty array of just nervous breakdowns, lots of drugs, lots of numbing pain. And then at 30 years old, to just bring things to a worsened point, I was gay bashed a second time. This time leaving a downtown Providence, Rhode Island gay club, lots of pride flags. And I was body slammed to the ground by some young college age kids running down the street, yelling nasty things about gay people. And so I landed head first, shoulder second, split my collarbone in two. The ambulance came. I sent them away. I was like, I don't have health insurance. You all look expensive. Go away. And then about 40 minutes later, when the endorphins wear off, I realized I was not okay. And so one of my friends that I sort of barely knew, but been hanging out with for a couple months, sort of an acquaintance, took me to the hospital. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, the doctor comes out and, says, look, you can go home under two conditions. One, you don't go to sleep because you have a head injury. And two, you don't go home by yourself. I'm like, all right, well, that's going to be a problem because I'm here by myself. And I was just going to get a cab home. And they were like, no, that guy that brought you here is still here. And so here's my life advice. when some guy you barely know is willing to take you home, from the hospital, prop you up on his couch with pillows because sleeping with a broken collarbone's impossible. Um, you find that guy, you marry him. And so amazingly, I actually, I've been with that person now since that event, which is 26 years ago. And so that same person that brought me to the hospital is now my husband, and we've been together 26 years. Not that I'm looking for silver linings, but the magic of that story is that when he came into my life, he was one stable person that gave me grounding. And before that, that is not something I had in my life was grounding. And so here's this person that helps me get a bank account, helps me get my driver's license, helped me get a better job by writing a resume for me. Like all the things I didn't know how to do myself. Now here's this person that walks into my life and gives me exactly what I need to get stable. And with that came, the obvious need for therapy. And so I actually did get into therapy. I'd done therapy in my 20s, but I never took it seriously. But then I was in my 30s. I was like, no, I'm taking this seriously. And I did the work. And anything my therapist told me to do, I did. Some of which was a good choice. Some of that was a bad choice. But I worked through it and remained in therapy all this time. So I've been in therapy for like 30 years, 20 some years, whatever it is now. I mean, I did therapy as a young person too, but it's not the same when you like go in there with like, I'm going to do this and commit to the work. Like you can go there and just talk, or you can go there and do the work. And so the second time around, I went and did the work and realized I could beat the anxiety disorder, the panic attacks, all of that stuff. I could beat it if I did the work to do that. So within, a 10-year period, I no longer needed antidepressants. I no longer needed anxiety medicines for panic attacks. I, was, I became like a pretty chilled out person. Somewhere in that magic, I ended up getting into the mental health field. And really, as a training director, I wasn't like a clinician, or I set up training for clinicians and mental health caseworkers. But I also sat at the back of the room and listened to everything. And so I ended up getting pretty knowledgeable about trauma and restorative justice, which came a little bit later. I was asked to be I was a volunteer mediator, and I'd gotten trained as a mediator and loved doing mediation. And so I ended up being the director at a community mediation center and, you know, running a nonprofit, doing peace work. And then I found restorative justice work. And it just made trauma, restorative justice, like all of this made sense to me as ways we can make the world less violent. And so I just started doing that work and ended up becoming good at it. Like I was a good mediator. Judges loved me because I could solve anything in small claims court you sent me, I was probably going to solve because it was fun for me and I was good at it. And so that moved me on to doing victim offender mediations, criminal court mediation, diversion work, where people are arrested but sent to community programming rather than jail. And I love doing this work enough that I started writing books about it. And so I wrote two books. The first one was called Building a Trauma Informed Restorative School, was published in 5 countries, translated to Turkish. I don't have a clue why Turkish. One translation is in Turkish. That I published my second book because the first book did so well. The publisher went after me for like 2 years to write another book. And so my co-editor on the first book became my co-author on the second book. And she is a 30-year pioneer of restorative justice work in Australia. And we decided to write the book together, which is called Becoming a Trauma-Informed Restorative Educator. I actually have it sitting next to me, which is not normal, but I have a copy of it sitting next to me. And it actually won a 2025 Nautilus Book Award, which if you don't know what those are, don't worry. I had no idea when I won it what it was. I was like, what's this? I don't even know what this is. And I looked and their slogan is books for a better world, or better books for a better world. And so I ended up winning that award, and now the book's selling really well. And so, this story starts off with a lot of pain and violence, and it ends with somehow turning all that into successes, and sort of proving the point that people can heal, people can get better, life gets better, those kind of messages, I think. And so it's been a wild ride, and still going. I've now spoken in what several different countries. I've had the pleasure of traveling and doing workshops on my work in multiple countries, and it's been fun. And the second book was actually translated. I probably don't have it anywhere near me, but it's probably behind me. It was actually translated in Barcelona into Catalan, which is the language people speak in Spain, in a certain area of Spain, around Barcelona and that area. And so that was really cool. They had a book release party and sort of conference, and brought me to Barcelona to speak. And it was like such a great experience to do that. And so I don't know, it's taken me places, and now I'm going to do a podcast and keep spreading the message there. So crazy story. It doesn't have an ending yet.
Yeah, well, let's say it's ongoing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very good overview of what you went through and how you came to where you are now. I think that's an experience for those who find a way to go on the healing journey, that it often has components in it that actually are very helpful to other people. Because I've had
Mm.
many guests who like they have an issue in their life, a sickness or a diagnosis or whatever, but they've come to realize they could help others with their experience and their knowledge and whatever came up, right? And they do that, and how much that was also part of the healing, is
Yeah.
helping others, which I thought is also significant. And another point you made, I think, is really important, is that what you think is normal, right? Your experience. So you don't. So if for instance, someone lives with a certain sickness their whole life, they won't know what it's like not to have that, right? So they don't even know that they may not even know that they're sick or whatever, right? Because they've coped with it their whole life. Things like
It,
that.
it's a common thing for people who have suffered through and survived child abuse,
Yeah.
even sexual abuse. If no one comes along to tell you that what's happening is not normal or okay, there's no way to know that. No one's going to come along and be like, "Hey, that's not normal." And only in the last, like, what, 15, 20 years have we started teaching children how to be safe and that people shouldn't be touching them. That's relatively new. And in the scope of humans, we've been around 315,000 years, and it's only been the last 100 where we've intentionally taught children that people touching you where you don't want to be touched is not okay. That's fairly new. And even in the sense of, that doesn't really help, kids who are being physically abused or emotionally abused or psychologically abused. It won't protect you from a narcissist, but it at least give people that layer of, like, what are the boundaries and how do I set them? But for the most part, it's a really common thing for survivors of trauma and abuse to just not know what was happening to them, or that it wasn't normal.
Absolutely. And how should you know, right? So I'm sure many of us are living with all kinds of things that we don't know are not okay, right? And living as if it were normal, right? And that's a huge thing to realize. Okay, the way we see the world could be completely wrong because we thought it was normal, right? Whatever we went through, and
Yeah.
didn't realize that it isn't something that is healthy.
I also think if you don't know, then you can't recognize that you have something to heal from. And so you may keep using behaviors and strategies that at one time in your life were really adaptive. Like, these are the things that kept you alive, but they're not working for you in math class. They're not working for you in your relationship. They're not working for you while you're trying to get a degree or move up in the work world. That a lot of those things that helped you as a kid hurt you as an adult. Because at one point they were protective, but now they're no longer needed, but you don't know that. And so until you do that healing work and until you do that sort of like deep dive of self reflection, a lot of folks don't know that the things they're doing in their life that aren't working for them were actually things they were doing to protect themselves. It's just no longer working that way. And they go, why do I keep doing this? Well, because you think you need protection that you no longer need. And so I think that's part of the tragic, part of trauma and healing is that there's so many people out there that don't recognize they need healing. They need to be in therapy. They need to address the things that have happened to them. You can't cure alcoholism or addictions until you cure the trauma that drives them. You can't stop narcissism. You can't stop bad relationships until you go back to the things that caused them. And often for most people, a lot of that is, what were the examples you had as a kid about relationships, about people, about how boundaries work? If no one ever taught you that, then you don't have it. And so there's a good chance you're living a life that has a lot of needless suffering you could get rid of if you chose to do the work. And I think, my sister said it best on my first episode of my podcast, because of course the best guest I could have about child abuse is my own sister. And she said something really profound in that episode. And that was that no one's coming to save you, right? There's no person's going to walk into your life with the job of saving you from yourself and from the trauma you experienced. You legit have to do this yourself. And that's hard. That's a hard thing to face up to. But it's the reality. Like you won't change until you want to. And then you need help. You need therapists, you need supportive people in your life. So you learn the boundaries to get rid of the people in your life that aren't making it wonderful. And I think that's also hard for folks because part of it's saying goodbye to some things and grieving relationships that aren't serving you anymore. And again, none of this is easy. And, I never want to make it sound easy, but it also isn't hard when you realize every day gets better. Like when you're at the bottom, there's no place to go but up. And so every day gets better. And I think that's been a beautiful arc of the story.
Yeah, I thought another thing you said, which was very important, is that this seeing danger and then not being able to see the actual real danger.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're so filled with dangers that you're looking out for that you don't see the one in front of you. And I think that's a very important reason as well to decide to look at things and change the way you see things and get help, right?
A lot of trauma survivors who grew up around chaos, violence, community violence, crime, if you grew up in poverty, that becomes normal. And so then when you get around chaos, violence, and crime, it's not phasing at all. This is normal. I think you see that a lot in the show Shameless. If you've ever watched that, television show on, I don't know, Showtime, HBO, one of those, where these kids are growing up in, a sort of impoverished area of Chicago, and their dad's an alcoholic. They're growing up in this house, and the norm is chaos. Well, now when chaos shows up, that's normal to you. When violence shows up, that's normal to you. And so you then find yourself in situations with a million red flags that you can't see. And because they're normal, those red flags are there, but they're normalized to you. And so you don't recognize that you're in danger. You don't recognize this isn't going to end well. These are bad decisions. You have no ability to do that because it's been so normalized. And I wouldn't want people to see that as an excuse for folks that are stuck, because being stuck just sucks. But I think for a lot of people who are stuck, that's part of why. They just don't know that that's where they are. And they look at their life in a way that, you can blame everybody else, and that blame is warranted. But even, if I want to blame my parents and my mom for, my nervous system issues, that's fair. She owns that. I don't. I was a kid. I don't own any of it. I was just a little one. But she does own that. But giving her the accountability and blame isn't changing my nervous system at 50 some years old. I have to do that. I have to go to therapy. I have to keep working, keep managing it, keep learning and growing. And nobody's doing that for you. No one's going to come do it. No one's going to make you put down a glass of wine. You got to do that yourself. No one's going to stop you from doing all the crazy things you're doing, except you. And I swear that's got to be the hardest part of healing, is knowing that no one's coming to do it for you. Your therapist can't even do it for you. They're just giving you the work to do, but you still got to do the work, and that part's rough.
Yeah, I think that's the part of taking responsibility, right? Being responsible has nothing to do with blame. It has to do with
Yeah.
being able to change something, right? Because if you can't if you can't accept your responsibility for changing or for finding another way, you can't do it. And so that yes, that is hard. It's really hard to say yes, I'm responsible for what's going on, right? It's like you're doing it to yourself, and that's something that's really hard to accept, right? You're doing the good things as well, but you're doing the bad things to yourself as well. So
Yeah.
you need to accept both, of course, right? You can't accept the responsibility for the good things either if you can't accept the responsibility for what is bad. And then you can't enjoy the good things either. And that's
Right.
the big issue there, is that one loses the ability to enjoy what is the good things in life as well.
Well, especially if your method of managing your past is things like addiction, doom scrolling, alcohol, smoking cannabis, whatever that thing may be. Brene Brown talks about that in her work around shame, that you don't get to selectively numb your feelings. So if you're numbing the bad feelings, you're also numbing the good feelings. And a lot of trauma survivors use a variety of numbing agents, everything from doom scrolling to drinking to, over exercising, or becoming a fitness nut or whatever but once you're numbed out on the bad stuff, you may not realize you're numbing out the good stuff like joy, love, feeling accepted and connected. Like, you numb one, you numb all. And that's you know
Yeah,
finding that and changing it is life changing, because then you do get to experience happiness, you do get to experience joy, you get to experience true, like, laughter in a different way. I think, you know there's
yeah,
so much that we don't realize we numb.
yeah. And that's so astonishing, right? As well. In the Course in Miracles, it also says either you love all, or you can't, or you're not experiencing love, right? And it's a really big one, right? Because like you said, if you're numbing one part of yourself, you're numbing all of yourself, because you can't selectively numb. You can't, but it's the same the other way around. you can't selectively take responsibility. So you can't
Yeah.
selectively only take responsibility for good things and discard the negative ones, because then you're discarding all. So yeah, it's quite a big step to say, yeah, that's true, and then to see what you can do with that, right? And how you can
Yeah.
move on from there. And even if you're not able to do it at first, it's still a step towards that, to recognize that.
Yeah. I think if you could, I mean, first steps first. Like if you can start recognize where you are,
Exactly.
your next step is now go find yourself a support community. Like who are going to be the people that you'll surround yourself with, who can help you get to the next level. That's baby steps, but baby steps are good, right? Like we may not, you can't change everything overnight. The best you're going to get is baby steps, but that's a baby step. So take it. And then
Yeah.
once you get that step, take the next step. And then, it just keep spiraling till it snowballs. And eventually it will. Eventually it all just starts to look really good. And you look around yourself and you have an amazing network of friends. You have an amazing network of things to do with your life and people to connect with and successes to celebrate. And it's not that that makes all the other stuff go away. It doesn't. Yesterday was Father's Day. I hate Father's Day. I hate Mother's Day even more. Like for some people those things are painful, and can I make that go away? No, it's going to be painful next year and the year after that. But that doesn't mean I have to give in to that. It doesn't mean I have to put my energy there. I could put my energy somewhere else. And I don't think a 20 years ago version of me would be able to do that the way that I can now because I did that work.
Yeah. I remember when I was starting out podcasting, and I was getting all these doubts, right, and so on. And then I got the inner message. Okay, the most powerful place to come from, and most healing and most informative and helpful, is from where you're at right now. And I was always thinking I had to be further on, right?
Mm,
And that's not true. And that's something I also tell my guests if they have any doubts about it or anything. Yeah, come from where you're at. That's where your teaching is most powerful. Your sharing is most powerful from. And that's a very big lesson also for me, right? To say, okay, that's where I'm at, right? I don't know the answers necessarily. I don't have the answers for myself. I may not have done all the work. I have not done all the work that can be done and needs to be done, right? I'm doing what I'm doing right now, and that's where I'm coming from.
yeah, I agree with that. I think everybody that comes into a space where they recognize they need to heal also comes into that space, you know, wanting it to be an overnight overnight thing. And the reality is you didn't get in this overnight. You're not getting out overnight. And that baby steps are probably the only way forward. And so do one thing today. If you could do one thing today that helps regulate your nervous system's going to thank you for that tomorrow when you're a little less anxious. Will you still be anxious? Yes. Will it be as bad? Maybe not. And then you do that the day after that and the day after that. And what neuroscience tells us is that you start creating new neurological pathways, neuroplasticity. And now those new pathways can sort of trump the old ones. And so I think Dr. Bruce Perry describes it in his work as, building a superhighway next to the old dirt road. And so those neural pathways that you had when you were young, based in trauma, they're there. But now you've built these superhighways next door that are faster, better, easier. So you only have to take the old road when there's a roadblock, when there's a problem. And so you just learn to not use the old road anymore. Let's take the superhighway. But you got to build it. It doesn't build itself. So you got to do this yourself. And I think that's been I mean, look, for me, one of the most healing things has been studying neuroscience and understanding how trauma impacts a developing brain. Because the more I learned about it, the more I felt like somebody was explaining me to me. I was like, oh wait, is this how it works? Of course I react to the world like this. This is how I was
Right.
brought up. Or of course I responded like this in my life because this is the circumstances I was put in. And so it took blame and shame out of the picture and replaced it with like this clear scientific understanding. For some people, they have a spiritual awakening or a religious awakening or, some other thing that comes in their life that might start helping them change the way they see the world. For me, that was neuroscience. It just made, I studied the ACEs study around adverse childhood experiences. I started looking at the neuroscience from people like Dr. Bruce Perry, Robert Sapolsky, Laurie Destells, those people who are studying trauma and the brain. Bessel van der Kolk, even although I have some critiques for his work, but I still think he's doing amazing work at bringing awareness to trauma. There's some great people out there teaching about what trauma does to the brain and how, from a neuroscientific approach, we can change our brains. And the difference that makes for someone is huge because when you are feeling really anxious, there's a good chance that what you're feeling really anxious about is just an old trigger. It's that old highway. It's realizing you're on the old dirt road. And that anxiety could be calmed when you know that. When you can look at yourself and be like, oh man, I'm on that old dirt road again. And then you get to choose, hey, I'm going to take this exit and get off the highway and get off this dirt road and go back on the highway. And I think, it's pretty amazing.
That is a very important aspect of it, is feeling understood, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where one of the things that was very instrumental for me as well is when I started realizing there might be other people out there who know what's going on, right? Who understand it. And then because of that decision that could be possible, and I started discovering books that spoke about the things that were important to me and I thought no one else was realizing or was not recognized by the people around me, right? As such. And then I found a book that was speaking about it and said, yeah, that is something that can be seen that way, right? And makes sense in this and that way. And then you don't feel alone with it. So it would be so I guess if it's neuroscience in your case, like you said, it could be a religious recognition for someone or a spiritual discovery, whatever it is, to realize you're not alone with this experience and and the reasons why this experience is happening is something that is actually known, right? And can be worked with or recognized or at least accepted because one knows how it's working.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But yes, when you're in fear, you tend to think you're alone with it, and you're the only one going through it.
And technically, again, back to that neuroscience perspective, right? When the way that our brain works is that you sort of have this regulatory brain at the lower parts, right? So your brainstem, cerebellum, diencephalon, these lower parts of the brain, when under stress and duress, will prevent information from going to the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. And because of that, you literally lose IQ points. And we've all done this. We all know this because we've all lost our phone and panicked. And the more you panic, the less likely you are to find it, right? Because you won't think to call it, you won't think to, slow down. Or we've all run around the house looking for our glasses, like I just had them, and not realize they're on top of your head because the panic takes you out of your thinking brain. So your body floods with cortisol, and that cortisol, even in your brain, prevents oxygen from getting to the frontal cortex. So the more stressed out humans are, the less likely they are to have the capacity for relationship, connection. Like if your priority is survival, of course you're going to be alone because your brain doesn't have the capacity for connection. And so our lower brain needs to feel safe before our emotional social brain can kick in. And so we can't be social with each other when we are, you know, in our lower parts of our brain under stress and duress, or in a state of terror or fear. That's why little babies are super inconsiderate and rude when they're having meltdowns as a toddler. It's because their little world is it's cutting off all those functions that could calm them down or let them attach. They can't access it. Some adults can't access those parts of their brain under stress and duress because they've been trained in that way through constant exposure to fear, constant exposure to chaos, constant exposure to fight or flight. Your brain gets wired for that. And so we know that trauma wires a brain for survival rather than connection and relationship. And so a lot of trauma survivors have trouble forming long lasting friendships, having long lasting relationships. I mean, I'm lucky that I have a long lasting relationship that's been awesome for both of us. And that's rare. For a lot of trauma survivors, 2, 3 divorces are common. Why? Because you know, did you have any role models for a good relationship? Did you have, the capacity for those things? And if you didn't, you're going to struggle to do those things. But also, that lack of brain access is also what's getting in the way of trauma survivors having healthy relationships, healthy support systems, because they don't recognize social cues. They didn't have healthy relationships as models. It can be really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're totally in fear, how are you supposed to relate? How are you supposed to care about what other people are feeling? You can't. You don't have the capacity. Yeah, it's impossible. So yeah, that is an aspect of another reason why it's so important to be able to move beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is a baby step thing, right? You have to take one little step at a time because it's a totally different way of seeing the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think trauma changes the way you see the world. Healing puts it back to where it was supposed to be. Right. And so I can see red flags where they're supposed to be, and I don't see them where they aren't. Where there was a day and age where I saw red flags where they didn't exist. So I'd have a panic attack in a very safe environment. Probably because I was in a safe environment, I would have a panic attack. And I would have to leave wherever I was because I had this unbelievable, overwhelming feeling I was supposed to be someplace, but I didn't know where. But wherever it wasn't here. And so I would have to leave my job. I would have to leave the grocery store. I'd have to, wherever I was, I just had to leave. I wouldn't know why. I would, and it didn't matter. I couldn't even think about the why. The only thing I could think about was I have to get out of where I am. And so I would look at the exits. I'd be like, I have to go. And it doesn't matter what I was doing. It took a long time to get my nervous system to a place where I wasn't wired like that anymore. Now I haven't had a panic attack in years, which is quite frankly delightful. I haven't really had an anxiety attack in years. And I chalk some of that up to just therapy and good good hard work, and the right therapy too, right? I don't think talk. I know talk therapy doesn't work for trauma survivors. Cognitive behavioral therapy rarely works because most trauma survivors aren't regulated enough in their nervous system to be in that cognitive part of their brain. And so CBT is not really helpful because, like, we got regulatory problems, not thinking problems. Although I do have to say, self talk is really important part of recovery. But in order for people to have the right therapies, you need somatosensory, therapies like EMDR or brain spotting, um, uh, somatic experiencing, things that actually deal with your nervous system. Those are what rewire the brain to stay to stay in a place where you can continue to have access to your cortex, which is your higher thinking. In order to stay there, you have to rewire your brain to not go into fight or flight, to not go into panic, and it takes a lot to rewire a brain. Definitely not an overnight job. Although it could be, if you're popping psilocybin at really high doses, it could be an overnight thing. But for the most part, probably not.
Yeah, that's a big one to recognize that there's more to it. And yeah, if you can't think, you can't think. If you can't think straight, right? You're not gonna benefit from talking about it, right? As much as if you could.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, self-talk I think is also one of the main factors. Is when you grow through things that are difficult, you can get into the mode of attacking yourself all the time,
Yeah.
and to slowly move away from that and towards being kind to yourself, one step at a time. Of course, as you said, that makes a huge difference because as long as you're attacking yourself, you're feeling awful, right? Even more awful than you would have to from the situation or the
Mm-hmm.
issue that's at hand.
Yeah. 100%. And to be clear, that self attack, that attacking oneself, there's a name for that. It's called shame. When people, when humans attack themselves or attack others, it's often based in shame. And we don't talk enough about shame or its damages. But when people are living in that shameful moment, it's painful. And so they're either going to attack themselves or attack others, or they'll start either avoiding or withdrawing. So it's one of two extremes. Like it's either the attack mode or it's hide mode. How many times have you in your life have people gotten into an argument with a friend and the first thing you do is avoid that friend? That's shame. And the only way to cure that is literally to talk about it. Shame loves secrecy. And I think when we move away from that, there's someplace else to go. Right. And so, you know, it's important that shame gets addressed when we talk about trauma. Because I forget the psychiatrist's name who wrote a book on trauma where he says that shame is basically trauma's accomplice at heading towards PTSD.
Yeah, that makes sense. In the Course in Miracles, it speaks of guilt as the
Mm-hmm.
as the center stage reason for feeling awful. This idea of separation, basically,
Mm-hmm.
that is the cause of guilt. Right? Yeah, it's a big and very important subject when it comes to facing what's going on in oneself and in one's interaction with what appears to be outside of you or is outside of you, right?
Yeah.
Because of our way of seeing things, it may not be outside of us what we think is there, right? It probably isn't there, right? like you said, you see red flags where there are none, and you don't see the ones that are there.
Yeah. And there is no trauma healing without grieving and without facing shame. I mean, they're just those are the paths. Like regardless what you've been through, those two elements are always there. Grieving and shame. And grieving's not fun. That's not a process anyone enjoys. And so when we have the opportunity to heal, it's a process of grieving the things that didn't happen that should have. Like, you know, part of getting over having a mom who's really abusive is grieving the mom I didn't get, right? Part of the healing process of, um, having the life that I want is grieving the one I didn't get. That sucks. But that also comes with shame, right? To look at yourself and say, well, I didn't get the right thing, so I'm not good enough. Again, which of course is nonsense, but it's the self-talk we do. And if we don't address those feelings of shame, and then we don't address the self-talk, and then we don't grieve the stuff that's happened, what are you left with? Well, you're left stuck, probably curled up on your kitchen floor drunk, which is not a healthy space for anyone.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect of it. You're right. All this, all the things that, all the things that you would have wanted, the regrets, you might call it. And there's so many words for these states of mind in which you go through a grieving process. Like you call it a grieving process, but there's so many ways of describing that. But it's
Yeah,
so painful. It's very painful, but it's also very revealing. Yeah, I think
yeah,
it's very, very important to address that. And yeah, I think one of the other things is daring to speak about things even if you know that you're wrong. Because the thoughts that are going on in my mind are usually totally wrong, especially when you're in fear or in what you call shame or
oh yeah,
guilt. There's definitely wrong, but it's important that you express them so that that can be brought to the light. And if you have a wonderful person who's able to help you with that, they will actually
yeah,
point out that you're actually saying things that are not helpful to yourself, are not and are not based in truth of the situation or of how who you are, right, or who you're meant to be.
right. I think that's why therapy, having a really strong, good therapist is important because that's a person you have to talk with. That's a person who can reflect back to you honestly, without BS. Like, do you realize you just said X about yourself? Do you realize, like, when I was doing somatic experiencing, my therapist often would point out my body language was the opposite of my words. And so she was trying to teach me to set boundaries like in the beginning. And she said, you do realize that you're shaking your head up and down when you're saying no. And I'm like, no, I didn't realize that. So then I had to work on actually practicing saying no to people by going no and not no. Without somebody to reflect that at me, I probably wouldn't have known. And so I think one of the beauties of, beautiful things about having a therapist is you've got someone to kind of call you out in a gentle, compassionate way to help you be who you want to be, which is ultimately the goal, right? We all just want to be the person that's the best version of me, whatever that means to anyone. And I think the right therapist can help you do that. But it also takes a few tries to get that therapist. I think I had a guest on my podcast, Stacey Nation, who wrote a book called What Happens in Therapy. And she said it takes 6 to 8 therapists before you finally find the right one, like statistically. And she said for therapists, that's a terrible statistic. But it's also a frustrating statistic for people who've tried therapy and said, oh, this isn't working. Well, is it not working, or did you just not get the right person that you click with? Because I think when you have the right person and you click with them, you get a lot of really personal work done. And you will have an attachment to your therapist. And that's not unhealthy. I mean, it comes with boundaries, but it's not unhealthy that you like this is a person you want to impress. This is a person you want to show you're doing better to. There's that's a good thing. I think I've had half dozen therapists over the last 30 years, and I think every one of them are people that I never wanted to come back the next week and say I'm doing worse. And so I always did the work because I actually wanted them to see me growing. And if I didn't have that relationship with them and they hadn't created that relationship with me, I think that's the helping relationship that people like Carl Rogers, a famous psychologist from the 80s, that's what he talked about when he described the helping relationship, which is that therapeutic relationship that actually helps people be a better version of themselves. And if you've got the right therapist who knows how to create that relationship, then you'll have someone that you actually want to do the work with and look forward to doing the work because every day you're feeling better. Like it's not that way in the beginning, but I'm 30 years into therapy and still going. I'll probably be going forever. But I look forward to it now because I'm looking forward to being, a better version of me tomorrow than I was today, which is all we can ask for. Like, right? Just can I be a better version of me tomorrow than I am today?
Yeah, it's or basically remembering who you actually are, right? It's
Yeah.
a remembering process as well. It's not just and forgetting as well. You have to forget as well in order to remember. So
Yeah.
it's a very, very, very deep issue of how, and there's various ways of going about it. And so yeah, obviously, you're not gonna make you may not make friends with the first person you meet, right? You may,
No.
right, and so a helpful friendship is also not necessarily the first person you start doing stuff with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a very important thing to realize. It's also not the first way you self talk to yourself may not be the right thing either. Right. So
Yeah. I always tell people if the conversation that's happening in your head is a conversation that you could not bear to witness with someone else, it's probably not a good conversation, right? That self talk's probably not healthy.
yeah.
Like if you're beating yourself up, if you're talking down to yourself, you know, you, we all need to talk to each other like the compassionate person that we need in our life. And some people call it reparenting. Like you need to talk to yourself like you wish a really awesome parent would have.
Mm,
Like being your own best, advocate, but
yeah.
to yourself.
That's awesome. If you choose to do that and you get good at it, it's awesome, right? But it's always a process because if you don't know how to do that, it's a whole thing. Yeah, and I
I think
think
it's even a matter, can you learn to catch yourself?
mm,
Like I don't know that you'll ever stop doing it, but can you catch yourself and change the story? And being
yeah,
like, "Oh, why am I talking to myself like this? This is terrible." And then change it and be like, "What do I really need?" Well, what I really need is understanding. What I really need is compassion and empathy. Well, give those things to yourself.
yeah,
Like instead of beating yourself up, why did I do that? Or like I'm such an idiot. And go like, now, you know what? I was under a lot of stress and pressure and I'm doing the best I can.
yeah.
That's not making excuses. You're still
No,
trying to be a better version of you. It's just don't beat yourself up for every little mistake that you make, which a lot of trauma survivors do that. They beat themselves up because they think they're not perfect or they have to be perfect. I mean, perfectionism is just shame in in a powerful format. And so I think when we allow ourselves to be imperfect, you know, then we also allow ourselves to be human and not beat ourselves up, because it's too easy. It's too easy to beat yourself up, but it's I think a much better choice when we get to talk to ourselves in a way that, like, talk to yourself like your best friend would talk to you.
The thing is, many people don't have such a best friend to model from.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But yes, I understand the sentiment and it makes sense. Anyways, I think it's really, really important to go into that topic and to look at how one speaks to oneself. And also in A Course in Miracles, it, for instance, says you have to choose between the ego and the Holy Spirit, as the same mind is the Holy Spirit, right? The same voice, the same mind would be the Holy Spirit. So yeah, you're always choosing one or the other. And so yes, if you catch yourself, you're probably choosing the Holy Spirit at that moment, if you would use the words of A Course in Miracles. And I think that's really, really, really important.
Yeah.
That one. And the more often we choose the Holy Spirit, the better.
Yeah.
But it's not right. It doesn't make sense to attack yourself for having listened to the ego, right? Because then that's again the ego, right? Once again. So yeah, it's a really, really, really important subject, and I think it's very important that we all pay attention to that.
Yeah.
So, is there anything I didn't ask you that you would like to answer, anyways?
Oh wow. I suppose. I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay. then we'll wrap up. Thank you so much for
Thanks for having me.
Joined me here. All the best for your podcast.
Yeah, thank
for
you.
your work and for your healing journey.
Thank you
for encouraging that one gets help in whatever form is helpful to us. For you, it's therapy and other things, I'm sure, because also podcasting and advocating for healing and you called it, what did you call it? The
restorative justice is
Yeah.
probably what you're thinking of, but
Yes.
It's a way of restorative justice is sort of a way of thinking about, crime and wrongdoing differently. Like the way that we see those things in the world today are, what rule did you break? Who broke it? And how are we going to punish you for breaking it? But in a restorative mindset, we recognize that we didn't break rules, we hurt people. And so we see the relational aspect of wrongdoing. And we address what happened, who was harmed, what was the harm, how do we repair the harm? So in our old way of thinking, which is, our sort of standard justice system, accountability equals punishment. But I can serve out my punishment and never own my actions. In restorative justice, accountability is owning your actions. It's knowing who you've harmed in what ways and changing those behaviors so that it doesn't happen again. That sounds to me like real accountability versus, our typical justice systems that just focus on punishing you. And so I advocate heavily for restorative justice systems, especially with our young people, because they have a developing brain that isn't going to be ready for the world for a decade after they hit puberty or more. And so I think it's super important that we find ways of discipline and justice that teach rather than just add suffering, which is what punishment does.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I think that's a very important aspect, is to say, okay, we want responsibility in the sense that one knows what one has done and to whom and what it and how to repair. Yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's also one of the things that you could also name the Last Judgment, for instance, where you're shown the truth about yourself. And then you can, and for me, it being shown the truth about yourself means that you're a changed person, right? You
Right.
can't know yourself with and the truth about what happened and what the cause was, why you acted that way, and so on, without having healing, right? Without healing, that's not possible. So it's actually, I think that you're healed by that. So I think that's another
Yeah.
way of seeing the Last Judgment that has often been seen as being thrown to hell or to heaven or whatever, right? But I think it's actually healing that's happening.
Can you
And
learn
that,
to take the good with the bad? Like of you, like
yeah,
we're not perfect. Can you learn to accept your imperfections lovingly, compassionately, and maybe even with a sense of humor? Right?
and other, yeah, and otherwise you can't live the good either, the wonderful aspects of who
Nope.
you are. You can't live them without accepting that there's other aspects that are not like that, right?
Yeah. 100%.
So yeah, thank you once again, Joe Brummer, for having been on the podcast, for sharing your expertise and your experience.
Yeah.
And
Thanks for having me.
thank you everyone else who has joined live and who will be joining in the future or is joining right now as you're listening, of course. Thank you so much. Please let people know about the podcast, review it, and spread the word. And if you want to be a guest on the podcast, please reach out to me. And if you know someone who would be a good guest, let them know or let me know so that I can reach out to them. And yeah, so that this podcast can have wonderful and many conversations in the future as well. And there's a lot of them to listen to that are out there already. So enjoy and blessings to you all until next time.